we are only days away from kickoff of the 2023 season, and maybe you have a couple of dynasty leagues and you're trying to acquire and try and buy these players that you've been trying to buy all off season, and you have to make this final push. So I'm going to bring you 4 players that you need to be acquiring before week 1 season and before they really break out, where nobody really wants to sell them anymore. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe, comment down below any players you're trying to buy right now before week 1. Let's get straight into it. I'm going to start off with the quarterback position here. Kenny Pickett. I think you guys know I've been raving about him all off season. This is the time. I think what we've seen in preseason and what we know this team can do now, yes, it may have been second or third stringers, but what we saw was consistency from Kenny Pickett. What we saw was every single drive finishing for Kenny Pickett, him driving the ball down the field and finishing in the red zone. One of the biggest things last year in the second half of the season was that Kenny Pickett had a high completion rate, 68% completion rate from weeks 13 to 18. But what happens is that he didn't finish the drive. It always resulted in a field goal. But what we saw in preseason, mind you, take it with a grain of salt because they were probably playing against first and second stringers, or second or third stringers. They finished every single drive. Now, if they went down every single drive, or if they, if he wasn't progressing the ball in every single drive with the second stringers against him, that would have been a huge problem. That would have been like, bro, are you okay? We need to really, reel it in here. We need to say, is Kenny Pickett really the guy? I'm not necessarily sure. According to the community right now, QB 17, he's my QB 17 as well. I want to bring him higher, but I can't. What I can do is try and buy him as low as possible. But before I get into that price, let's really, I kind of sound like a broken record if you guys know me and Kenny Pickett. Let's see what he has done. Okay, and I want to talk about preseason, but this offensive line has improved. Broderick Jones, arguably one of the best offensive tackles of the 2020 or 2023 draft, they got, right? They improved this offensive line. Another year under Matt Canada's offense, another year with Mike Tomlin, Kenny Pickett, a whole 17 games he's going to be under center. He is the leader in this locker room. It is pretty significant. Let's also look at preseason. He has played every single preseason game, right? And he's had 5 drives, all resulted in touchdowns, okay? He went 13 for 15, over 200 yards. It had a phenomenal passing rating of 158.3. That is Kenny Pickett in all three of his preseason games. That was with 2 touchdowns. Obviously, the other touchdowns resulted in rushing touchdowns, whether it's Jalen Warren or Najee Harris. But I think that is what's pretty significant when you really think of the quarterback play when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now if you want to go out and acquire someone like a Kenny Pickett, and I think that is where it kind of gets really interesting. You look at Kenny Pickett's value right now, once again, QB 17. And you may have to take a couple risks here. I'll be completely honest with you, because when you really look at the same value of someone like a Kenny Pickett, and you say, okay, where can I really pivot to? It's like, that's a bit shaky, but right now, with everything that I know, I'm willing to take that chance. Here are some players going around Kenny Pickett, or that has the same value as him that you can try and get. What about someone like a Deebo Samuel? Older wide receiver. Obviously, Brock Purdy's there. Can I pivot off of Kenny off of Deebo to get someone like a Kenny Pickett? And I truly believe you can get more in return. What about a Brock Purdy right now, who a lot of people are kind of raving about? A lot of people like his offense significantly better with Deebo, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. That makes sense why you can pivot off of Brock Purdy to Kenny Pickett. What about a Jordan Love? People love the background with him sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for a couple years. This offense also has Christian Watson, Aaron Jones, Jalen Reed, Luke Musgrave, and et cetera, et cetera. Those are some players you can kind of pivot to. Look, so many other players you can really say. I can even say Brandon Ayuk. Can you sell someone an older quarterback like a Dak Prescott and get Kenny Pickett in a little bit more in return? Once again, it might be a bit risky, but maybe by week 6 or 7, you're saying, dang, I should have taken that chance. Or maybe by week 6 or 7, we're all wrong and you shouldn't have traded for Kenny Pickett, right? So Kenny Pickett is my first guy that I'm trying to buy on the low right now before week 1. All right, let's continue with our second player. Let's stay with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'll keep this one short and sweet as well, because it is George Pickens, wide receiver 22 in the community, my wide receiver 19. Now, really just echoing everything that I said about Kenny Pickett and how this offense is really going to emerge coming into the 2023 season. We saw what George Pickens has done. We saw what George Pickens can do in preseason. We saw the acrobatic passes. We saw the touchdown passes that Kenny Pickett was throwing to George Pickens. It's going to be the Pickett to Pickens connection coming into 2023. And if you can acquire him sooner rather than later, that is going to be phenomenal. Okay, right now, once again, I'll keep this really short. We all know what George Pickens can do. He's coming out of Georgia, a top wide receiver, someone that we all thought that was going to be a first round pick, ended up being a second round pick, unfortunately. But hey, he struggled with that ACL tear, but he came back strong. He started week 1. And, you know, it was a quarterback carousel there for a little bit with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, but then him finding his rhythm in the second half, really showing that he can be of value. I think it's what's phenomenal. And one of the things I always like to say about George Pickens, when you go look back at his route tree, shout out to Matt Harmon, reception perception, you look at, he ran 33.3% of his routes was a 9 route. That's basically, you go on Madden and you put all 4 verticals. That's what George Pickens is running. He's just running straight down the field, and you say, if I'm open, you throw it to me. If I'm open, you throw it to me. Sometimes they threw it, sometimes they didn't, right? But now George Pickens, especially in preseason, we saw him get a little bit more creative. We saw Matt Canada get a little bit more creative, what George Pickens can do in his route tree. More slants, more digs, more comebacks, whatever the case may be. That's what George Pickens was doing coming into the season. He's still running the 9 routes as well. That's still in the route tree. Not saying he's not going to run that anymore. I'm just saying that he's going to be a little bit more creative, Matt Canada, in George Pickens' route tree and what he can be producing coming into the 2023 season. So if you're trying to acquire George Pickens, once again, maybe a bit risky, but I think of someone like a Brandon Ayuk, 25 years old, George Pickens 22. Can you send Brandon Ayuk and then get George Pickens back? What about someone, once again, a bit risky, someone like a Calvin Ridley, 28 years old, wide receiver? I think a lot of people, which sounds crazy, he's closer than you think. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 24, George Pickens, wide receiver 22. I think a lot of people right now, whether they're in a win now perspective or I would say a hybrid futuristic type of build, they would like to have Calvin Ridley because of the less mileage he has by missing that year of football, right? And I think that's something pretty significant that you can go out and try and acquire. What about Deebo Samuel? He's wide receiver 27 right now. I think you can send Deebo in a win now perspective for someone like a George Pickens. So a couple different options that you can do that I'm willing to do to acquire George Pickens. So my first player, Kenny Pickett. My second player, George Pickens. My third player on this list is a rookie wide receiver that I truly believe is going to be rising up a lot of people's rankings, especially as the season gets here. That's why you should be trying to acquire him before week 1, and that is Marvin Mims, currently wide receiver 40 in the community. He's my wide receiver 36 and rising, okay? Obviously, the biggest caveat here is that right now Jerry Jeudy's injured. Obviously, he didn't get put on the PUP as of right now, as I'm recording this video. Maybe he does get put on the PUP, physically unable to perform list. But if he doesn't, that's still okay, because Marvin Mims is going to have some opportunity to prove himself for the first couple weeks. I would say maybe weeks 1 and weeks 2. A little bit of background about Marvin Mims, coming out of Oklahoma State, 5'11", 183 pounds. This was the first player in Sean Payton's Denver Broncos career that he drafted. And I think that is pretty significant of why he wanted to do that, in my personal opinion. I think he believed he loved the talent, but he also needed depth. Yes, you have Jerry Jeudy. Yes, you have Courtland Sutton and everyone on this team. But when you really look at the future of this team, you think of Courtland Sutton, who is, yes, he's still in the contract, but they have a potential out in 2024, who was also a trade candidate this past year. You think of Jerry Jeudy, who's going into his 4th year. I'm pretty sure they might pick up his 5th year option, who also was a trade candidate coming into this year. And during the offseason, that was a huge talk, because I wanted Jerry Jeudy to come to the Giants, right? So both of these guys were trade candidates. And now when you think of Javonte Williams, who is healthy now, you think of all these injuries that they've received with Tim Patrick, Kendall Hilton, et cetera, and now Marvin Mims is going to be stepping up into a phenomenal opportunity. And we saw him running with the 1s. We saw him also running with the 2s this past year, or in preseason, right? He made a couple big acrobatic catches, and I think that's exactly what they're going to want to utilize him for. I think he has the speed, he has the hands, he has the ability to take the top off, but also play in the slot and be that small wide receiver that they are willing to acquire and get the ball to in the middle of the fields. So if you can go out and acquire Marvin Mims right now on the low, I think it's pretty good price right now. I don't think anyone is really trying to acquire him. And I think that's exactly what I'm going to be trying to do. So here are some names that I am willing to move to acquire someone like a Marvin Mims, and maybe this is a little bit risky. Once again, I think all these guys are a little bit risky when you think of it. But here are some names. Can I send away a Mike Evans and get Marvin Mims and some more? Maybe a second, maybe a couple seconds of Marvin Mims, whatever the case may be. Can I send a Khalil Herbert? I think everyone would agree they'd rather have Khalil Herbert. Maybe I could be wrong, but I think some people would say I'd rather have Khalil Herbert maybe in the win-now situation. I think Roscoe is going to take over the backfield. Can you send Khalil Herbert, get Marvin Mims a little bit more? What about a Mike Williams? Can I send a Mike Williams, get a Marvin Mims, and get a little bit more depending on that win-now strat, right? There's so many players that you can go out and try to acquire. This is a starting point, not a finish line, we'd always like to say. So once again, Marvin Mims, wide receiver 40 in the community, wide receiver 36, I think is going to be really difficult at the end of the 2023 season. Let's say the Broncos are a middle of the pack of the team. They probably send away Jerry, they probably send away Cortland, and let's just say they get, a Romeo Doomsday as their wide receiver 1 in the middle of the first round, hypothetically. Marvin Mims is still going to have value as a good solid wide receiver 2 who was drafted in the second round with their first pick because they didn't have a first round pick in the Russell Wilson trade. Keep that in mind. I think Marvin Mims is a phenomenal value coming into the 2023 season. Okay, my last player here, and I'll keep it nice, short, and sweet, is a tight end position. Luke Musgrave, tight end 13 in the community, my tight end 13 as well. And something that's I really want to hit on here is, Zach and I have been talking all off season, especially during the preseason stints, is that when you look at this offense with Jordan Love, not saying that Christian Watson is not going to be the wide receiver 1, but Jordan Love likes to spread the ball around. You saw Aaron Rodgers really favor Devontae Adams for a long time, and Aaron Jones in the dump off passes, and sometimes Allen Lazard when as a good second option in a rare occasion. But Jordan Love looked like he's going to be spreading the ball and not having a specific number 1 targeted player. And we've seen in preseason where he was spreading the ball to Romeo Doubs. We saw him to Jalen Reed. We also saw to Luke Musgrave. Now, Luke Musgrave, who I absolutely love, who I truly believe can be a phenomenal talent, who was an early second round pick for this Green Bay Packers out of Oregon State, can really take a next step up. He was one of my top tight ends coming out of this year's draft class. And I know the tight end position historically has improved in the first year, but if we are really going with this offense and really kind of seeing how they take it with a grain of salt, the way preseason is going, I think maybe we should be going out and trying to acquire Luke Musgrave. Only 23 years old, 6'6", 253 pounds. He's a great blocker, and he can also move in space when needed. Currently, right now, players that are going around Luke Musgrave are Rashee Rice. A Tajay Spears is higher than a Luke Musgrave in the Dynasty rankings, according to Keep Trade Cut. A James Conner, if I can send him away. What about an A.J. Dillon? That sounds crazy, but I definitely would send A.J. Dillon away and try and get Luke Musgraves and a little bit more, okay? Jalen Hyatt, I would rather have Jalen Hyatt. What about a Cortland Sutton? Can I send Cortland Sutton away? Can I send away a Nico Collins to acquire a Luke Musgrave? Brandon Cooks. Once again, this is a starting line, not a finish line. All these trades you're going to have to put in some sort of mix. Maybe trying to acquire, send hypothetically a Brandon Cooks and get Luke Musgrave and a little bit more depending on the win now strat, guys. But here are my 4 plays: George Pickens, Kenny Pickett, Marvin Mims, and Luke Musgrave. All 4 of these guys I truly believe you should be trying to acquire before week 1, before they do break out going into the 2023 season. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, comment down below your players that you're trying to acquire before week 1. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.